Let me finish tonight with the language of the Logan Act, which Congress passed and the President signed in the earliest days of our republic. Any citizen of the United States, wherever he may be, who without authority of the United States directly or indirectly commences or carries on any correspondence or intercourse with any foreign government or any officer or agent thereof with intent to influence the measures or conduct of any foreign government or of any officer or agent thereof in relation to any disputes or controversies with the United States or to defeat the measures of the United States shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 3 years or both. I wonder if the senators who rushed to sign that letter to the Iranian leaders had read this document, which is known as the Logan Act. It basically says that only the government of the United States is allowed under the law to negotiate with foreign governments. Again, I wonder if these 47 senators gave thought to what they were doing here. Then again, as I said in the beginning of this show, they did know exactly what they were doing. They were trying to undermine the work of an American president by, first of all, disrespecting him, even if they don't get charged and imprisoned for it. What they've done here is craven.
A stunning escalation in Republicans' attempts to sabotage nuclear diplomacy with Iran was on display today. The latest move, an extremely unusual open letter signed by 47 Republican senators, written to the Iranian regime, essentially instructing them that any deal they reach with Washington won't be worth the paper on which it is printed. Quote, "It has come to our attention while observing your nuclear negotiations with our government that you may not fully understand our constitutional system. We will consider any agreement regarding your nuclear weapons program that is not approved by the Congress as nothing more than an executive agreement between President Obama and Ayatollah Khamenei. The next president could revoke such an executive agreement with the stroke of a pen, and future Congresses could modify the terms of the agreement at any time." The letter was organized by freshman Republican Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas, who proudly admitted to a conservative audience back in January that he wanted to quash the ongoing negotiations.
Certain voices call for congressional restraint, urging Congress not to act now, lest Iran walk away from the negotiating table, undermining the fabled yet always absent moderates in Iran. But the end of these negotiations isn't an unintended consequence of congressional action. It is very much an intended consequence, a feature, not a bug, so to speak.
I think it's somewhat ironic to see some members of Congress wanting to make common cause with the hardliners in Iran. It's an unusual coalition. I think what we're going to focus on right now is actually seeing whether we can get a deal or not.
I'm glad at least that Tom Cotton is admitting that the reason for this is really to scuttle negotiations. And hopefully Republicans now will be willing to, have a really honest conversation about what they really want. Because if you are so enthusiastic about scuttling negotiations, but you are also so enthusiastic about making sure that Iran doesn't obtain a nuclear weapon, then there's really only one place to go. That's a military strike against Iran. That is a war with Iran. It's something that even President Obama has left on the table. But maybe now we can have an honest conversation about the consequences of their actions that they're undertaking.
Either these senators were trying to be helpful to the Iranians or harmful to the commander-in-chief in the midst of high-stakes international diplomacy. Either answer does discredit to the letter's signatories.
And while the letter to Iran began with the condescending first line, "It has come to our attention while observing your nuclear negotiations with our government, you may not fully understand our constitutional system," the response from Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, who holds a PhD in international relations from the University of Denver, one should note, questioned the signatories' own understanding of foreign affairs. Quote, "The authors may not fully understand that in international law, governments represent the entirety of their respective states, are responsible for the conduct of foreign affairs, are required to fulfill the obligations they undertake with other states, and may not invoke their internal law as justification for failure to perform their international obligations." Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal, who signed it today, and former Texas Governor Rick Perry, no longer even in office, who tweeted that he'd be proud and honored to sign. I asked Deputy State Department spokesperson Marie Harf about accusations within Iran that the letter shows the U.S. would not be able to keep its end of a possible nuclear bargain.
Well, certainly, Chris, inside the negotiating room, we have been very clear that if we get to an agreement, We will uphold our responsibilities just as we expect Iran to. But to be frank with you, these kinds of distractions, these kinds of partisan politics are really, they play a role here in terms of the fact that we are negotiating a very complicated agreement, and to have these kinds of distractions are really reckless and they're very irresponsible. And we as America, we as the United States, are strongest overseas in these kinds of negotiations when we speak with one voice and when we don't bring partisan politics into very serious foreign policy discussions.
The concern, of course, that members of the Senate have articulated, Tom Cotton among them, is essentially that they are not being sufficiently read in and prepped, and that the administration is prepared to essentially give away the store to Iran.
Well, I'd separate a few things out. First of all, I think there's no issue. We have talked to Congress about more, certainly since I've been at the State Department, than Iran. And throughout all of those talks, we have been very clear. Our bottom lines have not changed. We need to get to one-year breakout time, and we need to cut off the 4 pathways for Iran to get to a nuclear weapon. We have briefed many members of Congress in varying levels of detail. They play a key role here. But if Congress wants to play even more of a role, the way to do that is not to take this kind of reckless and irresponsible behavior. Look, I think it's disingenuous for them to claim that this letter is somehow intended to help the negotiators. I think anyone who sees it understands this is intended to really scuttle these negotiations, and I think that's incredibly dangerous.
Does John Kerry trust Mohammad Javad Zarif, who is the foreign minister for Iran?
This isn't about trust. We've always said this is not about trust. This is about Iran taking verifiable, credible, concrete steps to assure the world that it's upholding its end of the deal here. Under the Joint Plan of Action, which we've been living under since we finished it in November a few years ago, they have upheld their end of the bargain. That's not based on us. That's based on the IAEA verifying that. So none of this is about trust. That's why we need transparency, monitoring, verification into the program.
I've heard you give that answer before, and I understand why you give it. But any negotiation is about.
Why.
But any negotiation is about trust at a certain level, right? I mean, if you genuinely think the person across the table from you is completely duplicitous, cannot be held to their word at all, it's very hard to have a negotiation, even if you're negotiating something that's ultimately verifiable.
Well, I think that one of the reasons I actually think the Joint Plan of Action, this first step agreement we agreed to in Geneva, was so important is that we had never come to this kind of agreement with the Iranians before, with this regime. And so we were able to put that in place not knowing how this was going to play out. And the fact that they have kept all of their commitments under it. Again, this isn't about trust. It's about meeting commitments and really setting the stage for us to negotiate a comprehensive agreement. But I will guarantee you, Chris, if we get to an agreement, it will not be about trust. It will be about verification. And if we see them breaching the agreement, not living up to their commitments, there are many ways we will have of dealing with that, and we will be on the lookout for it.
I would encourage presidential candidates to join us. We already have 4 senators on the letter who are thinking about running for president. Rick Perry last week said that he wouldn't honor a deal that does not go through Congress. I've spoken privately with other presidential candidates who might join us. And for that matter, I'd encourage Hillary Clinton to join us in saying that Congress must approve any nuclear deal with Iran.
Howard.
I think this guy doesn't know what he's doing. How long has he been a senator? 2 months, and now he's. I mean, this is ridiculous. Yeah. It's really outrageous. And if Tom Cotton wasn't a veteran of the armed forces, I'd say this borders on treason. I've never heard of them doing this before. You don't undermine the President of the United States. It's never been done in the history of the country before. It's disrespectful, not just to the President Obama. It's disrespectful to the office of the presidency. You can disagree with the foreign policy, and in fact, I actually don't think that the Iranians are trustworthy, and I worry about a deal. But to do something like this, it just is breathtaking.
I think the thing that's also been missing in this discussion is that Tom Cotton gets the law wrong, as do all 46 other senators who joined him. The president is either engaging in what he's been saying which is an international arrangement with other parties that's non-binding, or he's engaging in an executive agreement which they can provide information to Congress, neither of which are subject to Senate approval. There is no treaty here. There is no negotiation negotiation. This isn't an arms control treaty. And so that's what's most astounding, is that 47 United States senators signed onto a piece of paper that actually doesn't apply at all to what the President of the United States is doing. And what he's doing is the same measures by which we protect U.S. forces stationed overseas with status of forces agreement. It's the same kind of deal we did with Russia in getting Syria to get rid of its chemical weapons. You didn't see Republican members saying we need to pass that deal with Russia. So the legal dimension of this I find fascinating, that so many lawmakers don't understand the law. I think that it's very important to understand that the posturing that's going on and the disdain that these senators have for President Obama,
I agree.
They're putting that higher than one of the most important potential strategic leaps that really matters, not only to the United States. It's a deeply important security and strategic issue. It is not a trivial issue what we're doing with Iran. It's a remarkable thing that they're posturing that way, and that's where the question of patriotism and whether you stand by the nation comes in. And that's what I fault Democrats on, for not holding their colleagues to account on that measure.